So, hi, Amy. Welcome to AVENUE.B, where we explore strategy, design, and brand consumer relationships by understanding people emotionally, socially, and cognitively. Today, I'm here with Amy Daroukakis, a global cultural strategist who provides global brands with strategic insights across culture, category, citizen, and company and emergent trends to inform their market direction and connect with their ideal audience. She has worked with brands including LVMH, Airbnb, Unilever, Soho House, Google, and Meta. In 2024, she co founded Culture Connectors, which is a global collective that brings the real lived cultural perspectives into brand decisions and connects them to these category experts. Today, we'll talk about the future of cultural intelligence, the cultural networks that connects our systems and our minds. We'll talk about the definition of culture, how it forms from the individual over networks to our system and the future. I know you say that you make people feel the future first. We'll talk about why trends and culture are not the same thing and what the difference is, the rise of parallel cultural worlds or bubbles, and how to turn cultural insight into brand strategy for your business. Hi, Amy. It's lovely to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you for that wonderful intro. And I mean, what an amazing intersection of things that you bring people in to talk about. They're all my favorite topics.
Thank you. Yeah, the same goes for me. Um, I know in previous talks you said that you get paid to be curious about culture and behavior. And I would like to start off with a definition of culture. So, how do you define culture, and how have you seen culture form and change through the lens of human meaning? And how do you feel about the difference between trends versus culture?
I mean, such a great question. And it's a topical question because the very notion of like what culture is and what it stands for. When I first started a few years ago, and I said I was a cultural strategist, and people would say, like, so you work with a company's culture? Like, there was this sense of that it had to do with workplace culture instead of a larger place. But it's become one of the most talked about, utilized titles we now see when it comes to strategy. What that means is that we don't have a clear sense of a definition even in the industry. So how are we going to then explain ourselves to brands specifically? So I see culture as a living, breathing organism, which means that if you are a brand that wants to participate in culture, you also have to participate. You cannot just remain a sideline audience. And I look at culture on a global lens. And because there's a lot of interest in youth culture. We still are obsessed, absolutely obsessed, but we go through
Mm-hmm.
generational obsession. So if you're a millennial right now, nobody's interested in you. And the Gen Zs, the tropes of these stereotypes of trying to contain generations, which we could talk about into other ways, but we tend to think of that's what is the reflection of what culture is, a generation. But actually, the work that I do, it's just as fascinating to see how do you welcome in a boomer to a museum and then somebody that was never there in the first place. So it's really about looking at the edges, and then I'm very heightened that there are rooms in which I'm in that I now need to bring chairs into. I'm not the right person to speak to lived experience, and that's why I built a network of 65 countries and 50 category experts to speak a cleaner truth. But I have a criteria. Like, if you've written a book, I don't want you to be my expert because you then live in your book rather than the street
Oh,
in
okay.
which you see lived experience. You kind of get there are people that get real in expertise get stuck in the pages, and that's the story they tell on repeat. Whereas lived culture, as I said, it's got a pulse, it moves, it shapes, it changes all the time, and brands have not kept up very much. For instance, I just saw in Sri Lanka, because of what we're going on with energy crisis, Wednesdays there's no work anymore. It's considered a national holiday, not of celebration, but because of scarcity. How could we have even thought about that, a few weeks ago? That's cultural movement. That's the pulse of change and the fastness of change. So it's super hard for brands to even grasp what culture means, let alone try and then speak culture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You also talk about culture as a sense maker in the moment, so or a current temperature check of society. So would you say that um, that the trends that are sort of fleeting versus culture as a more transformational shift, how would you, as a brand, or if you're working with global brands, how would you differentiate between this is a trend that Gen Z right now has, and but it doesn't really fit to our brand identity, so let's not fully hop on it and not change our own living brand organism in that way, or oh, the like multiple generations are shifting into this transformation, we have to see that our brand will follow that as well. When
Yeah.
at what point in time do you like know, oh, this is an actual shift versus just a trend?
So I I believe in using the language in which companies are still comfortable. So I still say trends. There's a lot of debate on like what is the value of a trend, but if we take out lexicon, like I don't call myself a futurist for a reason, because it's very polarizing as an expression. It's like loftier than then. Not everybody loves futurists. So strategy is where I play. Trends is the language in which I still express signals, but the cultural meaning is how I then share them. And I have a framework, and I've shared this with the 65 experts and as well as lots of clients. So I call it the Trend Galaxy Framework. And it goes from shooting stars to constellations to new planets to underexplored universes. And shooting stars, that's fast moving culture. Those signals and those trends are amazing for campaigns. That's like Super Bowl-esque, I'm in on the joke. Whereas constellations, I say to clients, is that's where I start to look for stars coming together, shifting behavior. This is where we can develop a new product. If you're opening a restaurant, okay, well, let's see what the new lexicon of flavor looks like. What is new formats? Where is new flavor profiles coming from? New chefs, identity. That's for that layer. And then new planets is really behavior change. This is not going to change. This is where GLP-1s, if I was working with a fast food brand, you have to then consider these behavior change, because these planets aren't necessarily leaving our universe. And then underexplored universe, this is the wild thinking. This is when you work with the client that does placemaking. So developing an airport for 2050 was a project, or a new neighborhood for 2040. They need wilder predictions. They need better sentiment. And if I gave them signals that most people, if I went on TikTok and was like, the Staples baddie is so amazing right now, you should be thinking about this for your 2050 airport. They don't match. I look for things that match. And I also look for the matching speed of a company. So a lot of companies think they are shooting star companies. They think they can move at speed and adopt. But actually, it's better if they're not fast moving companies, it's better to work on them with product development. So know thyself internally is important, and language enables you to then categorize what we signal share. So then I can go to a client, or I go to a client and I say, okay, well, you're wanting to develop a new restaurant experience. Well, we need to first think about new planets. What is behavior changing, and how will that look for seating arrangements? But then I also want to look for product development in the form of constellations, but I would never share shooting stars. It doesn't matter to
Okay.
them.
So you wouldn't call every business as that complex adaptive system that should shift as quick as a startup does.
Most can't. Most can't. I recently worked with a company, and I can never say the brand, but they did a partnership with Charlie SEX, and they were able to change their logo to like Brat Summer Green, and we're super excited about. But that's 2 years too late. Like, with the speed in which they made a
Now.
decision. Yeah,
Okay.
now.
Yeah, that song is long gone.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's shooting star. That was a moment in time that they should have grasped that 2 years ago. But they were so happy. They felt so like in culture because but it's too late. You've missed the so they're not equipped for shooting stars shifting decision making behavior. And a lot of companies, I mean, I really believe in know thyself because then you can be honest and actually, it takes the friction out of trying to be cool. Not every brand is meant to be like of the pulse and of the moment and respond like in seconds, like, oh, you missed the thing that ends up in SNL because it was the raccoon. Like, how come your Domino's ad didn't reflect something that was a meme? Not everybody needs to move like that, and that's okay. You only have so much attention you can spend as a brand, and real cultural lasting requires more work. It requires more connection points, and to make a real lasting connection into culture sometimes lasts longer than a CMO's run, which is on average 18 months. So there's the tricky part, right? There's the tension is if you want to invest, you have to put in the time. You need to build the bridges, but not everybody's willing to build a bridge.
And those 2 years that it took, do you think that's because of internal decision making and
Absolutely.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
so it wasn't like a strategic decision.
No, it was internal. Couldn't move as fast as when it would have aligned more with culture at the moment to be in that zeitgeisty conversation. That Brad Summer of 2023.
I remember.
You all remember.
Um, where do you think those shooting stars, like your framework is fascinating because it kind of summarizes the interactions in the complex system. And I would like to know, where do you think lies the root? So how do brands go into shooting stars, or how does society affect it, and does it always come from the individual? For example, does it come from the identity of an individual and their perception and then their behavior, and that turns into social proof and that turns into culture? Or where, like, obviously it's not that streamlined ever because there are a million touch points, but where do you see this kind of constellation and framework form at the core?
It is the roots of human behavior and change. And what we say and what we buy and what we do and what we invest in never matches, right? And there's always what the market wants to say. So there was a TikTok recently that was like, crypto's not cool. And I was like, it never was. That was the market trying to say, like, we're in a very much in an AI echo chamber and bubble at the moment, right? Where there's a lot of noise, but the zeitgeist in human behavior is showing up and saying that it matters because we're dating AI. We're going to it for advice. So I do believe the longer lasting imprint of AI is there in that it is a new planet, because I see the trickle of behavior change. I see somebody going first to a chap to get parenting behavior versus their parent, or someone going, well, actually, why do I even need a boyfriend? Like, this guy validates, this AI
That's
dude
crazy.
validates everything I say and thinks I'm wonderful. So you have to be observant, first of all, outside of your own category. The amount of brands, I cannot tell you. This is a story of, like, I once had to stand in front of a car company in Germany and talk about the future of cars, and I don't drive. And I've never been more scared to present, ever. And they knew nothing. They only, everything I said, they were like, oh, Look at that example. They knew their brand. They did not know so much the outside world of their category, which meant that the layer outside of that culture, people, human behavior was not part of their zeitgeist of looking and paying closer attention to. But the signals of a woman not feeling comfortable in a dealership wasn't part of their lexicon because they only had a relationship with themselves as the brand with only the dealer, never the customer. So then they miss the story of why the woman isn't purchasing the car, but they were never the person controlling that relationship to observe the behavior. So all of this is like, I guess the core center point of what I do is I sit down with a client who is like, what do you know you don't know? Like, before I'm going to tell you what you know,
Yeah.
like rooted in what do you not know? What do we need to find out? And then how do we champion this in so that everybody then knows this? I never want to do a presentation or a deck that lives on somebody's desktop. That's not the purpose of this work. It's to empower, to like connect, and to bring out and to go at the same time. Okay, your CEO may think he may know, but actually I know this like great chef who is mixing like bark flavors to come up with new ways of like cooking that could give you a better sense of where meat is going. Like, it's looking for the wild and wonderful outside of their periphery is kind of the gig.
I remember you had industries that range, you called it from curry to cars. Like different projects from curry to cars. Across all these industries, before we go deeper into these culture categories, have you seen any parallels where like which industries are very rigid in their thinking? For instance, automotive probably looks at the mechanical part of their offering rather than that soft part of like what's the story of that woman, versus an entirely different industry like food. What are they missing? Like, what industries that are in the periphery of their ecosystem, what are they not knowing? Like, do you have a case
Yeah.
study there where it was interesting, where they kind of opened their mind to what kind of system interactions that they could easily make, what kind of strategic partnerships they could make? What were they missing?
Well, I would say first and foremost, it's not necessarily that the categories themselves are stale, it's the movement of who moves in a company is where the kind of sometimes staleness and appetite for change and innovation. So, car companies, beyond the mechanics and the tropes of the category, people do not leave those jobs. They're there for 10 years. And so the internal culture does not really, there's not the foundation and the soil to like, let's flip it everything. Like, let's completely change categories. It's not an ingrained culture internally to move fast. But FMCG, that's a much faster moving culture, and from an employee, again back to those CMOs leaving every 18 months, they want to see speed of change. They want to be able to show like, hey, look at the product I launched, the campaign I was part of. They need social proof more. It's kind of like this weird thing where I saw this documentary years ago about sports figures, and there's this phenomenon called helmet head. And the more of a helmet you have to wear in your sports, the more like gold you wear. Like the more you need to like, because people don't see you. Like if you're a basketball player, there's a recognized sense. And so if we equate the same kind of thinking, it's like FMCG is basketball players. It's like recognized. It's like, in your grocery store, they want to move fast and quick. But like the sports figures of football and stuff, I don't know, there's a different they're they're not as seen and considered all the time. So that's my weird analogy of it. But where did change happen and where did habitual things? So I'm deeply fascinated with pet culture and the adoption of that. And in Spain recently, Pets are now considered a family member in the home. They have the same rights to be considered. But I was recently in a mall in Bangkok where an entire floor was dedicated to amazing, emerging, and interesting pet brands. But then in Tokyo, I saw this dog grooming luxury, I've never seen anything like it, dog spa, where these little dogs, they were like little princesses. Like how the dogs stood. So those are different waves of adoption, and also where commerce is going. So it's an established, you know, multi-billion kind of not so much functional industry in a lot of APAC, whereas there's a lot more functional pet care products within North America and in Europe. So you got it, like the rhythms of how culture kind of shows up. And as a brand, it's also important to go like, look at where this behavior change is happening. Like, how come you don't have a wedding section in your pet brand? Because like, where's your funeral, service? Because all of this stuff is where we're seeing. And so it's the ability to say, not only is here's the seeds of what you're doing now, but what are you going to do next? And then here's some cultural examples. That's why I really believe that culture lives beyond the 90% of where trend reports come from right now. The tropes of New York and London, I don't know, I've been in this game for 20 years. I find it really dull. I'm as curious about what slowness looks like right now in Botswana, or reclamation of coffee culture in Ethiopia. That's just so much more fascinating.
It really sounds like you're breaking the barriers between, I mean, a lot of people think that culture is only cultural origin, and certainly there are some identity and beliefs that shape this sort of human behavior, but it really seems like you're informing globally what kind of markets behave like this, where dogs are seen like that, and kind of bridging between industries and between brands, and kind of like, why do we think like this in America? Why do we think like that in Germany? How can we step back and look at how the whole world thinks or behaves, essentially?
And on that, it's just, do you notice I posed it as a question rather than here's the answer? Because when you present here's the answer, which a lot of the trend sector does, they go, here's the report. Here, this is, take it in.
True, like this is what's happening in 2025.
Yeah. So then we're in that like realm of cool, instead of how do you want to evolve as a company and how fast do you move in order to change. I wish we asked more questions than we do in this industry.
That's very true. I'd like to dive deeper into your culture connector categories from the company you co-founded, and go into how culture forms from the individual to network to system to future. I saw some kind of linear dynamic there, and I love some of the categories that you have on there. Maybe we can go into a couple of them. I know that there are sort of like 30 or 40 of them, but for the complex individual as cultural origin, you have categories like identity in motion. Where do we believe that we are truly from? What is our personal source of truth? Or universally human? What kind of emotional periods do we go through? Intimacy, grief, kindness, transition, and what nourishes us. So what are our sources of energy? Food, rest, nature, longevity, movement. What are your I know that you're the founder and you connect the category experts. So do you have any touch points with those so far?
Yeah, of course. So I can tell you the origin story of the categories because the first initial wave out in 25 was countries. Like let's get that a bit right. And then I was going to do this cultural zeitgeist piece of what I thought was really important for that year to pay attention to and knock on doors of experts. And then I was like, okay, new idea, complicated. Let's just like strip it back to countries, right? Launch year, simpler. Monica Jang, who's an expert in loneliness and I've used on a lot of different projects. I wrote her and was like, thanks, Monica, but no thank you. And she didn't see the message. She was like, I'm all in. And I was like, damn, I have countries and I have loneliness. Okay. But actually, and this is where creativity is, this is where systems thinking is, this is like all the things in which you're joyously like interested in is loneliness is a human universal truth, right? That crosses boundaries, that crosses land. And so at the time I called them archipelagos, underexplored. And then from her yes, I then started knocking on other human truths and experts that I thought were really important. And so now there's 50. And there's an expert in Afrofuturism, disability wisdom, rest, kindness, play, bodies in motion, invisible language in which we don't speak, grief. The list goes on and on. Food and the senses, longevity, intimacy, as you mentioned. And the thing is, these are all insight ingredients for brands in which they're starting to think about, again, a new neighborhood, or I can give you a case study of which I just was working on, is the future workplace experience for 2030, which had to do as much with the environment that was being created and to Gen Z specifically that were going to be hired into this environment. So I brought in experts in the senses. How do we make a break room better? How do we just not make it just about, what are the elements that we could add in order to give structure? Kindness. What does our onboarding look like? What does our offboarding look like? How do we then center point where kindness lives in us as a company if we're going to be dialing deeply into hospitality as a signature? Loneliness. How do you interconnect a generation that is deeply lonely in ways in which it's showing up? So RCA, which is the Royal College of Art, I'm doing a graduate kind of spotlight next week on them. And every single one of them did a loneliness project.
Oh,
So,
really? And they didn't
like,
talk to each other about it,
they didn't
apparently.
no, like that, it's such, so these things matter. And so bringing in expertise to go, it's not just about designing a space or comms or a playbook for how you reach an audience and say that it's Gen Z. How do we get to the root of the thing that we can kind of dial into? And I'll tell you, like, I don't know, clients like it because it's this lexicon of people that didn't just write a book. Some of them have. Some of them have written beautiful books too. But the thing I say is like this is a living, breathing black book. It evolves. There's a new class every year. Some remain, and then I welcome in new, and they spend the entire year looking for new experts. So I just invited somebody in for Bangladesh because I didn't have somebody within market, and masculinity. So those are two places in which I was like, we need expertise in that, and everyone's paid the same base rate globally. So there's transparency and fairness within countries, and that's what I'm just trying to shift forward.
I think this is so fantastic that you're kind of creating new categories that are more fluid and more of the universal human truth, as you call it. And I really feel that while brands are trying to kind of have more soft skills and increase in kind of the cultural adoption, they don't really think in the expertise that you are giving them. So,
Yeah, but
like, people are experts at loneliness, people are experts at intimacy, and brands need to kind of source that a little more, I think. Yeah.
definitely. And if you think about, I'll give you like examples of where it could work is, say you're a brand that's about to sunset Skype, right? Like, I had a deep relationship with Skype because it enabled me to call people. Like, not everything you can do with WhatsApp, right? There's very few
Yeah.
platforms. They just cut it off. But people had used that before they sunset that product. Could you imagine if you'd brought in an expert in grief? How do we make a proper ending for our technology before we sunset it? And as many of these tech brands specifically that continuously keep investing in brands and then sunsetting them or rolling them into there is a defined relationship. And especially with AI, I mean, there was recently an upgrade and it erased people's ability the boyfriends were lost, girlfriends were lost in the upgrade. A grief expert would be able for you to have some lexicon and language to be like, we're sorry. Because these are
Or to
developing.
restore your chat history, please.
Yeah,
Like have a memory of some sort.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The time capsule of your time with them. So I just think these things, what this then enables is for brands to go, we don't have, culture can be quite scary, but these are rooted in things. We understand these human needs. We just haven't designed very well for them. And there are people that know it better than us, better than me, hence a network. I'm not an expert in loneliness.
I'm just such a fan of all of these categories. Can we go a little into I know I like kind of categorize them again. Like
Yeah.
these three are more so for the complex system or turning into social networks. So the individual has no loneliness or has emotional periods, but then you have categories that are called what connects us, the places we belong, the power of story, so cultural expression. Do you have what kind of touch points do you think a brand needs, particularly in spatial culture? So I've been thinking about like I don't know, it's probably a mega trend or a cultural transformation of third places or fourth places, like having a separate place from your work and home. Since in a remote culture and in digitization and automation, everything is sort of all in one physical place. How can brands keep designing for hospitality? Like how do brands design a space, whether that be physical or not, where people feel represented and welcome and where they can be authentic? A couple of them here you have our home, place, nightlife, retail.
Yeah.
Like hospitality is not only in the hotel industry, right?
No, it breathes out. And, again, part of the get outside. I'll tell you about the network, but I'll give you like an example of I once stayed, the kind of how my brain works too is stayed in a hostel in Stockholm. This was years ago. And in the kitchen, they had all you could eat pasta. Just dry, endless fusilli. And
Endless.
what it endless fusilli, like this biggest container you'd ever seen. And over the course of being there for a few days, that became the center point of conversation. Somebody would be like, "Can I borrow your cream? Oh, I've got some extra mushrooms." And by the end of it, that free pasta became a conversation starter. It brought people into the kitchen. It was an aggregator of community. So looking outside for those kind of things, that's also a new flip of how we could look at hospitality. Then you weave in expertise. So, for instance, Jem, who's an expert in placemaking, she designs for both online and offline, and both of those things matter. Or Katie, who's an expert within hospitality itself, where she looks for inspiration and how she designs forward is not from the tropes of London. She's been doing it for 20 years, so she knows what is the signature, and she's got the story for like the hotel that also has childcare woven in. And guess what? They're booked every year. That investment of the babysitter means that family, like they just book the next by the time they leave, they've already secured their spot. You can never get into this hotel because it matched human behavior, what their customer needed. And they were very family, it wasn't a multi-generational. It was a lot of like sometimes single parents that needed a break, and they embedded that within what is their signature. It's not a smell, it's not a pop-up, it's a needed service. And I think sometimes, again, back to the like we can outcool ourselves. What does somebody need on a vacation? What does somebody stay in a hostel? It is to connect with another person. You choose it for that reason. I still stay sometimes because I want to meet people. What are the aggregators of that? And it can be like high touch and low touch, and digital and online. Offline, both of those they have to be designed at the same time. They're not separate experiences because, I always remember this. There was a guy, this was years ago at a conference, and he had reached peak status of a hotel. Like the number, right? Like he had been at that hotel.
Stars.
Yes. The stars of the stars. And nobody said anything at the front desk. Nothing. And he was devastated because I stay at your hotel more than my own home. And it was emotionally so like it was, and they lost their loyalty.
Don't they have don't star hotels have this like script where they have to say a certain welcome?
They do, but if they miss that opportunity, or he was thought of as just another guest who had reached a milestone versus like, when you have a call and like the start, like there needs to be a signifier that this moment matters more than other ones. This isn't just a tier. This is like
a milestone.
This is a milestone, and milestones are different than tiers. And so all of these are behavior. Guess what that like touched in on him? Deep loneliness and disconnect from his own family. And he felt a connection to this hotel that didn't end up feeling a connection back to him in that moment. Like it changed this dynamic. And also during the pandemic, a lot of people lost their loyalty status. And they're like, well, what am I loyal to? What am I loyal to? I don't know. So, there's so many layers of how you can start to explore how you show up as a brand differently. And again, this is culture. These are all moments in culture.
Another category was beyond what we see. This one is really interesting. I kind of went into some of these and I didn't even know what they were. I guess the overarching question is how far can we ourselves imagine different realities and transcend into, like, break those barriers into territories that are almost illogical at some times. So some of these are spirituality or quantum futures, neuro arts, immersive reality. It's kind of playing with our own extension of our mind, and I guess in times of uncertainty and complexity, we want to believe in something, right? In something larger. So we kind of use our minds to extend into that and use technology to extend into that. So what kind of touch points do you have with these ones?
Yeah, so let's talk about quantum futures as one, and that's her name is Samar, and she is, I'll start with her origin story, which is beautiful. And she was in charge of all of the windows at Anthropology, like the design, how creative they are. And as her body, we age, she was like, I need to put my creativity into different mediums and platforms to express my creativity. So she got really into AI, and how she looks at AI is incredibly creative. So she talks about it through the Silk Road of exchange, and actually how do we look at it instead of this transactional experience, which we're all experiencing right now. Give me your data, I give you an answer. Give me your YouTube channel, I will train it in Nano Banana to reflect. Like, there's so many complications right now, but what is the uneven exchange? She unpacks the cultural underlay behind it, and immersive is Lori, and I met her when she was an AI being at a conference called the House of Beautiful Business, and she embodied this like human robot and how she expressed creativity and how you got to interact with her. But what she brings in terms of expertise is like, how do you set the stage to have the conversation? What needs to be in the room? What is the sensory elements that make for a great experience? And as we keep moving into community-based pop-ups and, all these ways in which we're trying to like go outside more, right? How many times have you heard everybody wants to create a community, everybody wants to be offline, like, okay, let's take all of that with a grain of salt. She creates the bedrock of the map to create a much more tangible, interesting, immersive experience by looking at like who's in the room and how do we design better for that experience. So it is the unseen welcome, but like good brands that get it. So I was married years ago at 11 Madison Park, which is like one of the best restaurants in the world. And when you leave, they give you granola for your breakfast. That is invisible thinking. That is, and how
Like
many
a
times have
future
I,
touch point in
yeah,
the next morning, even though
yeah,
it's
it's
associated with a
beyond,
dinner.
yeah,
Yeah.
you've had the meal, but that is thinking about how do we extend our experience beyond the realms of just our backyard and the dinner, but it lingers longer. I'm telling you, I kept that jar forever. Is it wasn't just about this, the cereal the next day, which was handmade and amazing. Um, those kind of expertise see, they notice, is there a chair in the room for somebody to sit? Do we consider, in terms of like disability wisdom, do we consider a ramp being our checkbox for welcoming in, you know, disabled visitors? Like it's beyond that. Like it has to be beyond the like checkboxes of what we think, because those perspectives, you don't know, the joy is in getting to know all of these people deeply well through doing all these podcasts with them, and it is a network in which I know who they are. That matters. I notice airports differently. I was in Amsterdam, and is considered one of the like most modern, but there was stairs to go down, and I saw all these elderly people trying to, but the next bathroom was 10-minute walk away. But because I had the voice of Suleiman for disability wisdom, I noticed how inconvenient and unfair the stairs were.
Accessibility also here in New York.
Yes.
You
Horrendous. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's the whole point, is to play outside. Bring the outside inside is the goal.
Taking a couple steps back to the AI being, I had a question. So does she use technology and AI and quantum to kind of see the patterns of the people in the room, or analyze patterns and create insights and then translate that in a human way? Or is it just a fusion of tech and human?
In the case of Lori, she took the characteristics of AI and brought it to life so that there was like a real embodiment of a person, to be like, this is what it would look like if it was human. This would be what your interaction was. In the case of Samar, she did a workshop in Dubai where we unpacked culture and storytelling through fabric, which opened up all these different ways, and then she was able to like use the patterns in which we emerged to then feed back into technology to then tell a story. So I think there's a playful medium that tech specifically, they do not design for immersive. And I'm sorry, meta glasses are not is not what I would define as, it's still the tropes of a box which technology lives in. And somebody who plays in these categories will get you to explore in a much deeper way. I never thought of that. Like when I worked with the tech brand for a year, I worked with one of the big tech ones. I brought them signals of sex and crime every month because they're the biggest adopters of AI. And like they came every week because it was fascinating. It was like, okay, well, I can see that. Yeah, that is going to change behavior. That is going to change adoption. Crime moves faster than anyone when it comes to tech. So why shouldn't we be paying attention to what is the latest cyber hack? Okay, well, voice adoption. What are the barriers in which? That's the rabbit holes we get to play in. That's where I say I get paid to be curious. I mean, the
Yeah.
best.
I thought it was such a good quote. Um, a a different no, I think those are all the categories from Culture Connections. Um, so everyone should please check that out. Um, I'll also explore more into these categories. I'm just so fascinated by them. Okay, so going more into from cultural insight into strategy implementation. Um, we talked about how you are global and across different industries. So, where do you kind of make the connections across different organizational contexts and industries? What stays the same throughout cultures? I mean, sure, a lot of these culture connectors are the ones that are universally human, but do you have like a common human denominator that never changes from a conceptual aspect where brands could touch into that to go from cultural insight into strategic implementation? Because sometimes it's kind of hard in a day-to-day operational environment to really implement and translate a human insight like that into your business, especially if it's as rigid as we were talking about earlier. So there's a lot in this question, but kind of what would be a common human denominator that any brand could tap into or try to understand further?
My number one steer, and I kind of classify it as like your yuck is someone else's yum. Go with me on this one. Is there's way, way, way too many decisions being made out of personal preference within. Like my son didn't said this wasn't true, or well, I don't feel this way. This isn't my definition of family. This doesn't match my values. And so the biasness, the non-lived experience halts a lot of innovation, a lot of decision making. And so strategically, I play a lot in storytelling. And I always say I bring less noise into a room than more. That's my goal. So there's too much choice. We're in utopia. How many substacks could like we're awash in cultural nuggets and insights and possibilities and information more so than any time in history. Also, as an industry, we're just over indexed with amazing talent that are also all trying to showcase what they think at the same time. What does that feel like as a brand? Very scary. And so they go straight to gut first because gut decisions is how they've made a lot of their career moves, but that doesn't always mean they're great for brand decisions. And so strategic insight in bringing less noise into a room is the goal of that is to cut through. So it's the ability that I can go to a museum and strategically say the right question to go, you're moving into a new neighborhood, which is predominantly of a different ethnicity. You never welcome them in here first. So why do you have the expectation that they're going to be so willing to come when you never made them feel welcome? And they do live right outside your door. Rooting it in a hard truth that and then you have to showcase change. And then you show signals and trends where you go, well, this is how other museums have done it. This is how other institutions have welcomed in. This is how a brand did a really great thing. This is how they've done their bathroom setup, and this is how somebody did a cafeteria for multi-generational payment realities. And so it's, again, the key things with that are making it strategically important and imperative to them, addressing the biases that live outside, inside, and then who are the voices that you can bring to bring the varied perspectives. I look around a room a lot and I go, who's missing? Is the audience missing in this room? Well, then I have to figure out ways in which to bring them in. Because or else we're never going to reach them. We're just going to reach you. And the amount of campaigns that have been created or products, the entire tech industry created a genre and invested of products to make their lives easier. That's why we over-indexed on investment for a long time on food delivery, car share. They address the needs of the investors versus
Overly convenient
culture, right? Versus real need, what we need right now. We need new co-living solutions. We need new ways of relationship building. We need ways of paying back loans. Like, things that are outside of your zeitgeist is actually the things that are the most important to your core customer. So strategically being able to shift perspectives of I've never heard that or thought that way, that's the gig. That's the entire gig. And then how you bring that in, it just varies per project. So that's why I never have the same framework. I never bring in the same experts. It's bespoke every single time. I mean, probably it's harder, but I like it better.
And in these it sounds like it's a lot of belief shifting and identity shifting for the management inside a company, or eliminating biases, like you said. What kind of, like, in this sort of change management workshop or effort, which it almost is, what kind of cultural adoption and implementation strategies have proven in your previous work to be the most successful? Like, do you show them semiotics and art, or you mentioned like immersive examples of how different brands have done this in other industries, or like the Fossili hostel example could be totally relevant for a completely different brand that is struggling with customers and hospitality, because it really kind of shifts in your head, like, what are you doing wrong? You need like something for people to connect to, and to make it less awkward in a room, like have a conversation starter that could be a card or something. Do you have any physical or like tools for managers or for people trying to be the change champion in their organization? What kind of tools have helped with this belief shifting or eliminating these biases?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few different things. I spend a lot of time with the company itself. So I'll give you an example. I worked with a luxury luggage company, and they're like, yeah, we'd like you to interview our key stakeholders, right? I was like, I also want to go spend a day in this store, and I want to hang out and spend endless amount of time with your people that repair your luggage. I want to find who has knowledge, internal knowledge, before you even go outside. What do we have inside? And it's easier to champion that somebody from their team knew it than it is from, like, I spoke to Bobby,
this
and
passenger.
he feels, he thinks that we should do this as a brand, versus somebody that's I've been trying to say this for 20 years and nobody's heard me, or nobody ever asked me what I thought before. So root it in their comfort layer, internal first, is a good way to kind of structure it. Every presentation I do, I factor in, I have 80% you've never heard it, 20% I've heard of it. So I always pepper in examples. So I recently did a presentation last week for a bank that's shifting, and I started it before I even started presenting. I was like, how many of you walked past a matcha like on the way into work? And they all like lifted up their matchas. I went, how many of you watched something with subtitles in the last month? How many of your favorite foods does not match your passport? So first, like going like culture lives within you. Let's make it fun. So it's about setting the premise to give people permission in a time when there's such fear to get it wrong. And you're never going to get it completely right, but if you just stay again on that sameness surface, you'll never stand out. You'll still get your KPIs, but it's not. Because the people that go, oh, I love the Staples baddie, that's a risk investment. That's a personality that they're investing in. But then how many times can we talk about Duolingo? These were all brands that shaped a different perspective, and they embraced culture differently, internally and externally. That's the magic. Just having an external consultant come in and go ta-da doesn't match these days.
Okay. I think a closing reflection, because this time has been racing, racing away. You ask this to your clients usually, but I will ask you, what do you want to see, build, know, or dream differently in 2026, or let's say 2030? So how do you think we will feel the future first, basically? Like, what is...
Yeah. I want us to kind of like, okay, keep going on the AI journey, right? Like, keep experimenting, know the limitations, know the places in which things break and where things can grow. But I want us to go back to storytelling, exploring, connecting with other people, pushing past our own biases, being willing to ask bigger questions than ourselves, being deeply curious in a category outside our own, and to make decision making not based on just personal lived experience, but to deeply go into the, to be really damn interested in your customer. And if you are, then you wouldn't actually want synthetic research, human research, to replace the voice of Tom. Because I'm telling you, when I've met a CEO and I talk to this, like, this is the story of da 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 da, it lands better. So I guess, being willing to partake in culture instead of extract from culture, I would say, is like the bigger overarching thing. And then the ways in which you interact, in which your brand grows, is the invitation. And from a personal perspective, this is such hard graft in terms of building something that hasn't necessarily been there before. But I've always said I want to leave the industry looking different than the one I came in. And so then I have to put in the hard work now to kind of say, like, these are the places in which I find wonder, and the world is so wondrous, and I don't want us to get so kind of blasé about like, oh, I've seen that. And I mean, I guess I'm also a champion
Because
for
it's
trends.
changing.
It's changing. And I get asked a lot about how I feel about trends, and I still think they're important. They're another way of signifying shifts. So hopefully that helps give some perspective of what keeps me curious. But
Absolutely.
lovely to meet you, Geena.
Yeah, lovely to meet you. Thank you so much. I could listen to your examples for hours. I can't believe how you like connect facility and grief and all these different types of human truths that I will be thinking for years. Thank you so much. I think we really have a well-rounded kind of picture of how things are constantly shifting, how we have these living organisms, and how we even kind of made trends a little too rigid, or we kind of have our PDFs and slide decks a little too far from what's actually happening in the world. And I really believe that managers or brand strategists or whoever watching really will understand more how to turn a cultural, real life human insight into strategy, and really champion that from within an organization as well. So Amy, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure.